Good evening and thank you for joining us. The Thunder Bay Police Services Board has issued an official statement in response to yesterday's scathing letter from board member Georgianne Morisseau. She suggested the police service is on the brink of collapse due to alleged leadership failures. That letter was not discussed at today's police board meeting, but an update from the OIPRD was presented, and Chair Kristen Oliver says the findings in that report address many of the concerns outlined by Morisseau. Alex Flood explains.
A written response from Police Board Chair Kristen Oliver was released late Monday night regarding Georgianne Morisseau's criticisms. It states, the board, with the exception of member Morisseau, is united, working well and far from collapse, adding they are committed to building a police service that is constantly improving. Morisseau has scheduled a virtual news conference for Thursday morning to speak publicly about her concerns, and her letter was not discussed at this police board meeting. Instead, the board received an OIPRD report on the progress on its recommendations to tackle systemic racism within the force. Board Vice Chair Michael Power notes this guidance is met with great care and consideration.
This is a standing agenda item. This is literally on every one of our agendas. The board and the service take this very seriously. I want to commend probably the thousands of hours that have been invested by so many across the organization in moving this forward. And
of the 40 applicable recommendations outlined in the review, 28 have been completed and 12 are still ongoing. Oliver referenced in her written response that these findings should have ticked many of the boxes Morisseau was claiming hadn't yet been settled. Chief Sylvie Hoth says the recommendations have in fact helped the police service become more transparent.
I guess a kudos to the board for your continued support, both through advocacy and increases in the budget to actualize this, and a very big kudos to all of our staff who have been dedicated to this in order to ensure that we are successful as a service and that we are moving forward.
Hoth released her own statement Tuesday afternoon saying she echoes Oliver's response to Morisseau. Hoth says the police board needs to speak with one voice in order to have effective governance, and she remains committed to the safety and well-being of everyone she serves. Alex Flood, TBT News.
The tragic fire that took the lives of 3 Sandy Lake children on Friday morning has prompted calls for improved fire suppression services in First Nation communities. The Ontario NDP's critic for Indigenous Relations, Saul Mamakwa, says senior levels of government need to commit more resources on reserves before more lives are lost. The early morning fire in Sandy Lake claimed the lives of Grant, Remy, and Wilfred Meekus, aged 9, 6, and 4, respectively. Mamakwa is calling on both Premier Ford and the federal government for more resources, saying, quote, the jurisdictional ping pong has left First Nations without a way to protect their people.
On how we're going to provide service on reserve with respect to fire suppression, fire safety. We're talking about no firehouse, like fire trucks, fire equipment. We're talking about volunteers, firefighters, first responders, and where's the training?
According to the Ontario Chief Coroner's Office, First Nations children aged 0 to 9 years old have a fire-related mortality rate that's 86 times higher than other kids. In response to rising admissions, the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Centre is raising its COVID-19 response level from red control to gray lockdown. That means the hospital will implement several new measures, such as testing all new admissions for the virus, ramping down clinical services, and limiting access for essential care partners, contractors, and vendors. There are now 21 COVID-19 patients being treated at the Regional Health Sciences Centre. That's down from 26 on Monday. But the number of COVID patients in the ICU is holding steady at 6. The hospital now has an overall occupancy rate of more than 101%. Its ICU occupancy rate, which includes non-COVID patients, has risen to 86%. The Thunder Bay District Health Unit is reporting 86 new infections today. Of course, the actual number could be much higher due to limited testing across the province. There are 292 known active COVID-19 cases in the district. 17 residents are in hospital, up from 16 on Monday, with 2 people in the ICU. The Northwestern Health Unit is reporting 33 new cases. There are now 201 known active cases across its catchment area. 3 people from that part of the region are hospitalized with the virus, down from 6 on Monday. The NWHU doesn't have any COVID-19 patients in intensive care. Ontario is reporting a record 4,183 COVID-19 patients in hospital, with at least 580 in the ICU. Still, the Premier is hinting that the province could begin easing restrictions in the coming days. Colin DeMello reports.
Nearly 2 weeks after shutting down portions of the economy, Premier Doug Ford says he's ready to relax some of the restrictions.
So we'll have some positive news. I believe we're going to make some announcements later this week about, going back to other levels of restrictions.
The province has been in what the government calls a modified Step 2 since January 5th, closing indoor dining, shutting down gyms and movie theaters, and limiting capacity in retail settings.
There's no one that dislikes these lockdowns more than I do. I actually despise them.
But there are questions about how the government could reach a decision so quickly as the situation in hospitals worsens. There are now 4,100 people with COVID-19 in hospital today. That's a new pandemic record. And while the Science Advisory Table believes those numbers are beginning to plateau, the province, they believe, needs more time.
Just wait a little bit longer so that we see the hospital occupancy not up here, but just go down a little bit. Right now, next step is school openings, and then we need to breathe a bit.
The government's critics are urging caution.
I think we have to be extra careful at this moment, particularly as we've seen how the surge in our hospitals because of Omicron has ended up postponing thousands of surgeries every single week.
Now that schools are beginning to reopen, the Ford government is being pressed to expand PCR testing. Ever since the government imposed new testing restrictions, both the number of tests in blue and the backlog in red have dropped to pre-Omicron levels. Some want education workers and students to be prioritized.
The goal now has to be to get to June 30th without closing schools again. And the only way to make sure that happens is a massive drive to get the supports and the investments into our schools and to get back to that kind of testing and reporting that we were relying on as parents.
The chief medical officer of health has said with widespread prevalence of Omicron, symptomatic people should assume they have the virus and isolate.
That was CTV's Colin DeMello reporting. The Finlandia Cooperative continues to make plans to revive the world-famous Holoto restaurant. The co-op recently held its first general meeting since the devastating fire that destroyed the Finnish Labour Temple last month. Mitchell Ringos has more.
During the virtual meeting, 8 people accepted nominations to sit on the Finlandia Co-op's board of directors. And with that done, Director Derek Lankinen spoke about the plans for the Holoto brand going forward. It included projects with the Sleeping Giant Brewing Company, new merchandise, pop-up sites, and a potential new Holoto location. Most of these ideas are not yet in the works, as the massive fire at the site of the original Holoto threw a wrench into the co-op's plans to reopen it. Lankinen says the short-term solution could be pop-up locations.
We're going to start bringing the Holoto brand a little bit more forefront, working with some pop-up restaurant type situations where, we just kind of like take over a space, whether it's the brick and mortar space or the RFDA. There's a lot of different spaces that we can utilize. We just kind of have to plan all that stuff out accordingly.
And the biggest plan for 2022 is renting a new Holoto location that would include some of the old historical pieces while upgrading the famous restaurant to be even better. The board is planning to downsize the space to lower costs, and so far there are no building spaces locked down for the new restaurant. Interim President Paula Happinen says for now they will focus on gathering funds to start fresh.
The unfortunate situation with the Finnish Labour Temple has kind of thrown things, has changed things. So what our biggest focus is on now, and will continue to be, is raising funds so that we're able to, once our space is ready, that we'll be able to set it up like the restaurant should be set up.
The December 22nd fire at the Finnish Labour Temple was not discussed at the general meeting. Owner Brad McKinnon addressed the membership to reiterate that he does want to rebuild on that site, and for the time being will be working with the co-op to help in their future efforts.
Hopefully the new site of the former Holoto restaurant. So I'm working with the group to try and come up with a solution to house the restaurant, and hopefully at some point this coming year.
The Finlandia Co-op will continue selling the Holoto's famous pancake mix to raise funds for their new restaurant site. The group currently has around $63,000 saved up from selling memberships, pancake mix, and the 2020 Save the Holoto fundraiser campaign. Mitchell Ringos, TBT News.
An icon of the local construction industry has passed away. Tom Jones helped change the landscape of Thunder Bay during his lengthy career with Tom Jones Construction. The family confirmed that Jones died this morning. He was one of Northern Ontario's best known and most prolific developers. He'd led the family-owned company since the mid-1960s, and for the next 5 decades, Tom Jones Construction was the main contractor for a number of high-profile projects around the city and the region. Jones was also a longtime community contributor, serving on local boards and helping raise money for numerous charities. There's no word yet regarding funeral arrangements. Tom Jones was 80 years old. The Shelter House is looking for a new executive director. Effective tomorrow, Michelle Jordan will no longer be running the shelter after she accepted a job with Indigenous Services Canada. Jordan has served a number of roles with Shelter House over her 12 years, including spending the last 4 as executive director. Operations Supervisor Michelle Morgan will run the shelter in the interim while it continues to deal with a COVID-19 outbreak. The Board of Directors says it will be a quick turnaround to find a suitable new leader, as they've already reached out to firms that conduct executive searches. Thunder Bay City Council has agreed to support the Tiny Homes Thunder Bay initiative. The in-principle endorsement was unanimous last night after some noted it could impact the group's efforts to find funding. One of the goals of the initiative is to create a 6-home lot on city land neighboring Matawa's Training and Wellness Center on North Algoma Street. Much of last night's discussion centered around why an in-principle endorsement is needed. Councillors also wanted to make sure it wouldn't tie the city to providing financial support for a type of initiatives that's typically the responsibility of senior levels of government.
Is it a motion in principle from council? Does that allow you to apply to other funds other than the Community Partnership Fund, and is it required?
Yes, it is required because it also solidifies the partnership, okay? Because when you ask for something, there has to be something in principle to say move forward. If we don't have anything from council saying, yeah, we're committed, we're going to move forward, it doesn't promise anything right now. There's no promises here.
The Tiny Homes Committee has already received $150,000 from the federally funded Canada Mortgage and Housing. Roberto also believes it's likely that Matawa will buy the property from the city. The group may then need to return to council to ask for the zoning bylaw to be changed on the Algoma Street lot. Officials with the city's engineering division have announced that the Woodcrest Road Bridge south of John Street Road will be closed until further notice. The closure is a result of deterioration that's considered significantly worse than when it was last inspected in 2020. The old structure is scheduled to be replaced this year, pending council's approval of the 2022 budget. City engineers say if further structural evaluations raise any more concerns, the bridge will remain closed until a new one can be built by this summer. A detour route is currently available at Goods Road off of Belrose Road. The Thunder Bay Public Library has revised its technology loan program. Local branches will now offer tablets, Chromebooks, and Wi-Fi hub rentals to all teenaged and adult members. Members can place a hold, borrow, or renew a tablet or Chromebook with unlimited access to Wi-Fi via a hotspot hub for a period of 28 days. The program was offered by referral from partner organizations in the past, but has now transitioned to a regular program available to everyone. With the pandemic limiting the library's ability to stay open, those who rely on its computers were left with few options. Community Hub librarian Laura Princeler says the program is meant to close the digital divide here in our city.
So there's people who have access to computers and laptops and the internet, the Wi-Fi data they need. And then there's many people who don't have that access. And it can be so limiting when so much of our lives now is lived online, especially how we communicate with friends and family even how you apply for jobs. So often now it's, they expect an electronic application. So we knew that this was something really important.
Anyone who wants to borrow a tablet or computer must have a library card. They can be booked online or over the phone. Princeler says there's currently no end date for the loan program.